My name is Linda Dodson-Trahala. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to our webinar on literacy. It's called The Parent's Guide to Learning in the Classroom. I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Professor David Booth from the University of Toronto, and our consultant from the Durham Catholic Board. It's Michael Hamill, and we will start off tonight with Professor David Booth. We are starting with grade 4 to grade 8. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening. Grade 4 to grade 8. Well, those are fun kids, aren't they? They're just discovering independence. They can go to school on the bus by themselves. Life is changing. I've spent my whole life with this age group, so I know them quite well. And my granddaughter is just going into grade 4. Life will change. So I wanted us to look at this slide just for a moment, because this is the big change in my life when I was a teacher working with grades 4, 5, 6. Because today we have so much electronic now to help us or hinder us with what we're trying to do. So our schools are all trying to make sense now of literacy with this new technological world. But I always say that a book is a handheld tool. So we can also include books in our world today alongside, and books online, by the way. So we don't need to, I'm not too concerned about the medium, more what's in it, what's on it, what we do with it. That's my big concern with grades 4 to 8. And the other thing is, grades 4 to 8 should be the quantity years. More is better. More reading, more writing, more talking. The more they do it, the better they get at it. Not unlike hockey. So, this is what I thought teaching grades 7 and 8 would be like. I would sit under a tree and read beautiful things to them. And gee, it didn't turn out that way. So, this is a different world. This was my world when I was in grade 5. The Treasury readers. Everybody in my class had the same book, and we all read it at the same time, and I was the only one who liked it. Unfortunately, doesn't make you popular. So we have changed so much since this book. Check the first page in the book. Those who don't know who that is, that's our 90-year-old Queen's mom. This was a very British world at the time. Now compare that to today's world and tell me schools haven't changed. So this is the new century. We're already 16 years into the new century. The kids born at the beginning of the new century are in 10th grade. So we're moving along. Literacy's got a whole new definition now to make the most meaning possible with this text form at this particular time in this particular context. And as we grow and we grow up, we change our minds about texts we met, read, and wrote, and saw, films that were different. What happens is literacy now is a bigger concept. It's making meaning with all the different text forms there are. And it's this meaning making that's the heart of teaching today and learning. So if you look at this list of what we read today and what we construct, what we write, create, read, you watch the grade 6 kid making a PowerPoint, and he's better than me. He knows how to manipulate those forms and shapes and colors and word fonts much better than I do. Notice mine is very simply done, no color. Notice that all the things the kids are reading in grades 4 to 8, good gracious. Their rooms are full of print, full of image, the computer screen, the iPad, the phone. They're so aware now of text. What does my grade 4 granddaughter want more than anything in the world? A phone. What is she not getting? So what I like this is a grade 4 class. They wrote this as their mantra for the year. This classroom has no walls. We can now move beyond the walls of the classroom. We now, with electronics, with print, with book, with iPad, we can go anywhere at any time. What do we do with all that information? So I talked about texting because texting now is the #1 form of communication in the world. Emails are still mine, but everybody else texts. I thought that was a spelling mistake when I got the book. And the great debate. I still use proper punctuation on my texting, and everybody laughs at me. Is the pencil better than the computer? I no longer write much by pencil or pen. I'm basically online all the time now. I write books, so I can't take time to write with a pen. I can do it much faster on screen. But that doesn't mean writing isn't useful, because there are times on a card or to my granddaughter or to my grandson when I want to write my own writing. But interesting enough that as a cursive writing lessens in the world and print type takes over, in America on the university exam that they all have to write, 3/4 printed. So the world sees print on screen and now is using print as a form of writing. However, when you do calligraphy with kids in grade 8, they suddenly look at the beauty of letters. So everything matters some of the time. But I'm not after what their print B looks like. I'm after what they're saying with it, what sense it's making. Books aren't dead, of course. They're online, but they're also in print. I can't tell you how important it is that kids have their own print sometimes. I was working with a grade 6 class, and I got them all a copy of a book, Silverwing. I'll show you later. And they got their copy, and a girl came at the end of the 2-week time with that novel and said, "Mr. Booth, do we keep this book? And you take it home, it goes on your night table, it's your book forever. It's the first book I've ever had." So never underestimate the power of a book alongside the power of the cell phone. I have both. What about boys and girls? Are they different? Yes. Not always. Some read the same book, some see the same film, some like the same music. But often there are differences. And sometimes boys don't choose the books and resources we want them to. So I now would be in my classroom and with the libraries, be very aware that some books for kids are for boys, and some are for girls, and some are for all of us. But there are some differences. For example, in this particular frame where they're playing soccer or football, those kids may not read what my granddaughter reads, but they may. So no stereotyping, but listen to them. See who they are. Be prepared. No bias on your part. Wrestling magazines. I was working with a grade 9 class in Prince Edward Island. They invited me down to talk about boys and reading to the parents on Saturday. And Saturday, 300 parents came out, but they thought I'd better work with the kids on Friday. So I went to a high school, grade 9. They brought in 9 boys who were called non-readers. They sat down and I said, "Guys, I think you can read. Tell me all the things you can read." And they listed 101 things they could read, from sports headlines to TV guide. So we have to be very careful about this word non-reader. At the end, one boy said, "Sir, I get 2 wrestling magazines a month. I give them to my friends after I've read them, the guys in this circle. Do you think wrestling magazines is reading?" Of course I think that's reading. It's strong reading. It's reading about things I don't have enough information about. You could actually tell me a lot about it. So I want you to get past the barrier of this is what they should read to this is what they can read and this is what they might read. School can make kids read things you can't at home. We have stronger power. We mark, we grade, we have impetus. But I still in school want choice. Choice is the best thing we've got for ownership in a child's life. Once they have choice in their classroom, they understand how that classroom can operate for them. So we use this word now in teaching and home as well. Are they engaged? If they're cutting the lawn and they're grumbling, you have to go out and rake with them. That's how it works. They still have to do it, but they do it as part of a process, part of a family, part of a deal. So this engagement word is tricky. Doesn't mean we do easy things in school, easy things at homes, but it means we do things that matter or we find ways to make it matter. I love teaching grade 7 when they say, we hate reading. Really? I've got this graphic novel I was going to give you each a copy of. It's a bit violent. They take it immediately. I love kids who say that. And by the way, when a kid says to you at home, I hate reading, say, here's your answer every single time. You hate reading what? Your phone? Well, no. What is it you hate reading? Long stuff. Ah, long stuff. Long stuff is short stuff collected. Let's just read a part at a time then. Critical creative understanding with different text forms. That's the deal. All kinds of text forms, some maps and diagrams and forms and poems and stories and sports stories, statistics, all that is literacy. And in grade 7 and 8, that's where we can get them. I love stories that are about strong people, like miners. Nobody wants the kid to be a miner, but boy, we all drive cars. And when I talk to kids about mining and the pain and the danger, and they go online and find out safety things that miners now are doing and that mine owners are doing, life changes for those kids. I love powerful books with kids. Silverwing is a Canadian book about the bats of Canada. And you know what? I couldn't put it down. I hate bats. And this book is all fiction, but the truth is how bats live and work. You get natural truth with this, and story so powerful, you just can't stop reading it. Imagine that with kids. Nightjohn's about the slave problem in America, where the Underground Railway came to Canada. And in America, in those days, if a slave learned to read, he had his fingers cut off. That's how important reading is. Those guys knew how important it was. I love that novel. Critical understanding. Don't read all those points, but they're there. I would have made the color better, but I don't know how to do that on my machine. I have to get a kid to show me. But critical understanding. I want them to argue and debate and read carefully. A grade 8 class was doing the building of the CPR railway in their history class. So we went to the boardroom of the head of the education center, not here, and we sat at the big board table, and they were the people defending the building of the CPR against those men who had families die in the building of it. It was the most amazing grade 8 class I've ever seen. Everybody learned, critically examining through all kinds of different strategies. We make connections, we look at what matters most, we infer, we visualize. We found a lot of boys that have trouble reading can't make the pictures in their mind. That's why graphic text can be a very great jump-off point, where they actually see what the artist sees, and they begin to realize print creates these visuals in our head, and those who can't see in their mind can't read very well. So that visualizing becomes very important. They ask questions, we ask questions, we synthesize information, summarize, analyze, and develop opinions. I want opinions from kids, but I want them informed. When they say, I think this, I can say, why do you think that? Who says? I need to know. I love strong debate with kids, arguments, discussions. They're ready, but I'm tough on what they say and who said it. This is a online reading journal, and they do it online because they found the kids, when they write, say things more deeply than when they speak. But when they take the writing after and get in circles and talk about it, they've got strong things to talk about. So this girl said, I also really like these chapters because I could relate to them very well. The majority of these chapters are set while Tamara and Miss Barclay are driving across Canada. I could relate to that very well. I've traveled to Jasper, Banff, and Vancouver. I liked how the author described the weather conditions. He was talking about the countryside of the mountains. I felt like I was back there again. I think that was the reason I enjoyed these chapters the most. I really cannot wait to read on. I want to see what happens the rest of the trip. Grade 8. So the teacher responds, It's a really good reflection. I remember how much tension there was with my family when we had to go on long trips. Oh my goodness. It brings back in my life my son's constant complaints. Imagine being cramped in a car with everyone. Although it's just the two of them, you can imagine how Tamara is feeling, especially since they are of different ages. I've never driven across Canada, but would like to do this one day. Keep on reading and posting. So with this interaction, and then of course the other kids begin posting. So you've got all this dialogue happening about what they're reading. And even that boy that wasn't going to bother reading it, he wants to get online and have a post. And when some girl says, "What do you mean by that?" he's suddenly deeply engaged and involved. Suddenly we can use technology to support our reading of print text. This was a grade 4 class I was visiting, and I always say the same thing. Actually, I think it was in this board. I always say the same thing. What are you reading? And now the kids are so smart. They'll say, my phone, or my computer, or my game cards, or Minecraft. They're getting really wise with me. And I say, no books? And this kid at the back said, I just read a novel. Young man, I'm proud of you. What was it called? Chasing Vermeer. Who was Vermeer? He says, I don't know. But the book's about this artist that we stole a painting and the kids have to find it. Gee, if it's about an artist, who do you think Vermeer might be? And he finally said, is he the artist? I said, that's right. This is when teachers are needed and parents are needed. We can ask these clarifying questions. So I said, well, we'll find out about Vermeer on the computer in the corner. He said, right now? Yeah, go back to the computer, find out about Vermeer. In 10 seconds he comes back. Vermeer was Dutch, lived in 1652, and painted these. I said, wow, what did the paintings look like? Mr. Booth, there's no paintings in a novel, ho, ho, ho. And I said, yes, but there's paintings on the internet, and the principal has a color computer. You can come back here in 20 minutes with 8 paintings by Vermeer. Go. Like now, yes. He came back in 25 minutes with 8 colored paintings off the printer in the principal's office in color by Vermeer. He taped them to the blackboard. We have these 8 paintings from Holland in a classroom here. Where did he get that? And then I said, which one did the people steal in the novel? He said, I know which one, Mr. Booth. Hey, what do you kids think? Come up and look. Which one did they steal? And this is the one. I've got a nice picture of it. Never mind. It's the lady writing. And I thought the irony of it, the lady writing is the one he found. All that. Now this was a similar story with the kids, all boys. There's an all boys class somewhere for people like me who aren't popular. And I got there in Timmins, and they turned out to be the wonderful kids. They were getting iPads for every kid in the class. So we talked about heroes. That was what that last book was. They each had that on their iPad. I paid for it. And we talked about the heroes in the first chapter. And they decided to list heroes on the board. They listed so many heroes. Guess who their first hero was? JFK. I said, how about a Canadian hero? Anybody? And we began to group them by Canadian, sports, politics. And one boy said, sir, you've got to put Jesus on that board. Okay, we're putting Jesus on this board as a hero. And then this other boy said, what about artists, sir? Are artists heroes? Do you think they are? Well, I think they could be. He said, well, the man that painted the Mona Lisa must be a hero. The Mona Lisa, Who painted that? Leonardo DiCaprio. No. Did you get that at all? Leo? Okay. What's Leo's last name? The famous actor? DiCaprio. So this is another Leonardo. And here's what the kids did. Here's the kids. I said, show me the Mona Lisa. There it is. Every kid in that class on his iPad, the first day with the iPad, had the Mona Lisa. See the boy in the green sweater? He has muscular dystrophy. He's in a wheelchair with a helper at all times. But on the iPad, he can scroll. And he found his Mona Lisa. In my whole life, that's what changed me about 6 years ago, when I realized technology is here, it's powerful, and it can be print-based and visually based together. I'm not afraid anymore of technology. I want to know what's on that screen, how can I use it powerfully, how can kids make sense of those texts in print and image, and learn more than they could have without it. So for my reader, I showed you the very first of this, we're now here with these readers, and everything in between. The world is better. I'm going to push those kids, so next time I visit, they're going to have such information, such power in their hands to make sense of the world. Hooray for grades 4 to grade 8. My favorite grades.
Thank you, David.
Pleasure.
Okay. So as mentioned before, my name is Michael Hamill, and I'm a teaching and learning consultant with the Durham Catholic District School Board. And I just want to take you through to extend on to what David just shared with us, and to also look at this through the lens of our school board, and then also bring it down towards the classroom, and then also extend it towards the home as well. So what we have here is our student well-being and achievement board improvement plan. It's very important that we have that student well-being ahead of that. Ahead of the achievement, because before it just used to be a board improvement plan, and then we actually made it. We found that it was necessary for us to have that student well-being in place, because without that student well-being, it's very challenging for achievement to happen. So it's important for us to nurture those students. So if you look at the center of that board improvement plan, we have educator, student, and curriculum. And I think traditionally, in a traditional educational system, the teacher or the educator would learn the curriculum, teach it to the student, and then the student would have to give it back to the teacher. But when we look at that triangle now, which we refer to as the instructional core, we look at it as a bond. And it was a student that told me that used that term when he looked at this, that the student, the educator, and the curriculum have a bond together. So that's really an evolutional change in our educational system. If you look at the blue circle, the blue inner circle, those are what we call evidence-based practices. And so the one that I want to touch on is called accountable talk. But in order for us to have that accountable talk piece, we need to look at what our learning environments used to look like. And so when you think about the traditional classroom from the 1970s, you can probably relate to a classroom like this. You were most likely sitting at a desk by yourself, probably not a lot of talk. An engaged classroom, when we think of engagement, which is interesting that at that time, if you were quiet and able to do your work and handed it in on time, and those things were probably more valued than maybe the actual thinking or learning that was actually taking place. And that didn't happen all the time, but that was something that was probably evident. And so it's a shift that we're trying to make. And when we think about where we were as an educational system and where we're moving towards now, if you see the difference between those two pictures, is the one that we look at as now has opportunities for dialogue, for conversation, and it supports the whole concept of accountable talk. As educators, we don't just assess through product, and when we're thinking about product, we're thinking about pencil and paper tasks. We actually assess through observation, conversation, and product. And so in order for a teacher to assess through observation and conversation, they need to have a learning environment that encompasses this. And so when you're thinking about that concept too, we want to bring that whole idea of the importance of observations and conversations at the home as well, that it's not just product-based pieces that are coming home. And so this is a new shift as well for us, because when we think about a classroom environment, the first thing that we come up with is that third teacher. So this is what we call a monograph that comes from the ministry, and they actually provide us with a lot of learning and a lot of amazing information for us to move forward as a system. And this is a monograph that came out in 2012. So when you hear that concept or that idea of the third teacher, I know when I've shown this to students, they think that you have 3 teachers now in your classroom, but the actual idea is that the first teacher is actually the traditional teacher, but it's also an adult, so it's also that parent or that guardian who would also be considered that teacher. That second teacher is then that peer learner, so that peer learning that happens in school. And then that third teacher is actually the physical and the social environment. And so thinking about maybe what that classroom looks like and how does that support you as actually looking at it as a teacher, as opposed to just a room that you kind of show up in every day and do your work. And so when you bring those 3 together, in order for a successful learning environment, you really have to have a physical and social environment that supports the second teacher, that supports peer-to-peer learning, and that also supports that teacher is also a co-learner with the students. So that's a whole new shift that we're looking at as well. But it's also a shift that we want to take in parenting too. That I'm also learning. I have a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old, but I'm also learning along with them. I'm not just teaching them, but I'm also teaching and learning with them. And even our department has made a shift where we used to be called the program department, but we actually call ourselves the teaching and learning department. Or maybe it's even vice versa, that'll probably evolve to we're a learning and teaching department. So there's a nice quote here that I like. There's 2 nice quotes, especially I'll read the one from Sir Ken Robinson, but look at your learning space with 21st century eyes. Does it work for what we know about learning today or just for what we know about learning in the past? And as a system as well, we're really moving towards the learning environment or the third teacher, not just within the 4 walls of a classroom, but also looking at that learning commons, so evolving that library into that learning commons, and then also looking at what our outdoor environment looks like, so our surrounding community, and looking at that as a learning environment as well. And again, as a parent, there's so many different learning opportunities that you can connect to. So when you think about the third teacher, thinking about your environment as an actual teacher, and again, there's so many things that can explode from there. So, as I mentioned before when I showed you the board improvement plan, we wanted to talk to you about that instructional core and that support of the learning environment, but then we also wanted to look at one of those habits of mind, and that is the accountable talk piece. And so when you're looking at accountable talk, when you're thinking about literacy, traditionally I think when we think about literacy, it's basically reading maybe comes first and then writing comes second, and then I guess the oral language comes into play at the end. But really the 3 of them really work together, and especially at an earlier age, that whole oral language piece is extremely important. And so that whole idea of what accountable talk looks like, when you see these 4 different headings, so that whole concept of making connections, so using your prior knowledge to understand what you're actually analyzing. And then we're also looking at texts as well. So I'll just go through these 4 first. So questions and wonderings, so what I wonder why. Listening to others, I see what you're saying. And then, and again, it's an interesting concept when we think about talk. There's a big important part which is listening and listening to what other people have to say. In order to have a proper, accountable talking conversation. And then in the last one, we're moving in towards that, add to what others say. So listening to what someone says, and then actually what that person has said to you could actually change or tweak what you're actually thinking right now. It's very, very powerful to be explicitly understanding what these concepts actually mean. And so as educators, we've been pretty explicit as to how you actually have a conversation with someone, how important it is to be accountable when you're talking. And so when we think about texts, you would think about these pieces maybe when you're reading a text and how you're connecting to that particular text. What are the wonderings that you're having? And a text can be so many different things. There's so many varieties of text that we see within our curriculum. It can be a poster, it can be a video, it could be a text, as in a texting piece, it could be an email, it can be anything, it can be written, there's so many varieties of text. We're also texts, our facial expressions, those things are text. And so when you're thinking about these 4 elements, you want to bring in the idea or the concept of a variety of texts. We also have a world around us, and that when we think about literacy, a question like this that we used in the earlier one, so in the earlier session, sorry, how might the 407 impact the Durham region? The next one I wanted to share with us as well is how might an international airport in Pickering impact the Durham region? And it's interesting living in the region of Durham where there's a lot of people who don't even really, not a lot of people, but there's some people who don't even know that there's a potential international airport that's going to be built up there. And I know when I even taught in Pickering, I would be driving down north and coming south, and there's all the signs that are up, and there's been that protest for over 40 years. And talking to some students in South Pickering, I'd say, are you guys aware of this international airport that's possibly going to be built here? And again, many not knowing about that. But then, okay, so now what? What do we want to do? What do we want to do with that? And so looking around, just seeing the world around us and just within this region, those are two major concepts or two major pieces right now, that whole 407 being built and even that whole idea of an international airport in Pickering. So what are the positive impacts? What are the negative impacts? What a great conversation that you can have with that. And so another concept or another idea that we have, and this is something that we would even have up on our walls in our classroom, but it's something that you can take home with you as well. And it's the idea of creating those higher order thinking questions. And so this is what we call a question matrix. There's so many of them out there. There's many different kinds that you can find on the internet. Basically what the idea is the farther you get down to the lower right corner, the higher order of the thinking is question is coming along, and what it actually creates is usually those higher order thinking questions create more questions, which create more questions, which create more questions, and so that there really enhances or enriches the whole idea of critical thinking, critical literacy, and so again, this is a great tool to have to share with your child, which you can easily just print off. Some teachers, some students like to use the term thick or thin questions. So what is that? Is that a thick question? Is that a thin question? So if you're analyzing a text or analyzing a situation with your child, these are some questions that you can have in your back pocket to move forward with that. So then I also have some quotes here that I think are of interest. So we speak not only to be understood, but to understand. Again, yeah, we speak to not only to be understood, but to understand. Which is very, very powerful, right? It's an interesting concept. But so language is exposed the edge of thought, and I love this one as well. So I didn't know what I knew until I talked about it, and so it's that whole idea of communicating and sharing with others, and being able to express what you're thinking and then maybe listening to someone else's thinking, and that whole idea of appreciating that. And it really comes back to that second teacher as well, that whole peer learner. And so having that environment, whether it's in a classroom or at home as well, really allows that whole higher order critical thinking piece to be enhanced. And again, I absolutely love this. So the idea that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. So reading and writing and talk are so important, but they need to be interacting with one another. And I think that's when that's what enriches that whole critical thinking, critical literacy piece, is when the three of them are intertwined. If they're just siloed, if reading just happens and then it's separate from writing and it's separate from conversations, what your child is reading at home or what are they writing at home, we should have conversations about that as well. It shouldn't just be something that we kind of fold up or that we send off, that we also have conversations around that as well. And so here are some other back pocket questions you can have with your child around powerful questions to ask. So again, whether it's a situation or whether it's a text that you're reading with your child or something that you're analyzing or something that you're seeing on TV. So again, so what do you think? Why do you think that? How do you know this? And can you tell me more? And what questions do you still have? And when we move back to the question matrix, there's so many, you can create so many questions from so many questions from so many questions. And so in the K-3, I talked about the importance of schema. And so schema is what we call, it's basically our prior knowledge. And some people refer to it as our invisible backpacks, that we all have these experiences that allow us to understand texts and to know, to get a deeper understanding of what a text is. And so it's just interesting that it's from my daughter who's 2 years old, she knows what a pirate is and so many different elements of a pirate. I don't know how that happens, but there's so much exposure about pirate knowledge. But we're talking about building prior knowledge. I had a student when I did this particular lesson refer to it as building pirate knowledge around Schema. But when you think about all the different experiences and knowledge that students have, this is probably the #1 most popular Halloween costume. And when they come to a text like this in a primary setting, it allows them to develop a deeper understanding, which allows them to extend their thinking into a particular text. But then when you move from that idea of schema, and also schema supporting and interacting with inferencing and interacting with point of view, and when you bring those three together and they're not siloed, that they're actually working together and understanding that, when you move to a text like this, it makes things a lot more interesting. So this particular text here is actually the Canadian coat of arms. And so when we move in towards that junior grade era, a lot of our questioning and a lot of our talking is around whose voice or opinion is missing from this text. And so this might be a bit of a touchy subject for some people, but when you look at that Canadian coat of arms, it basically has the 4 founding nations. Those 3 lines would represent England. The yellow and red line there would represent Scotland. And then you have the 3 flowers that would represent France. And then the harp that would represent Ireland. Now, through my perspective, I found about this, my godfather taught me actually about this, and I'm from an Irish background, just like Mr. Booth is as well, and so I was pretty proud that my heritage was actually a part of this, but then it actually showed my bias too, because I'm like, wait a second, there's other people that are also missing from this. It's not just those 4 nations that, that developed Canada. Maybe they're 4 founding, but there's still other elements that are missing here. And so when you think about whose voice, opinion is missing from this text, and when you definitely show this to students, one of the big ones that really comes out is, oh my God, we have not mentioned our First Nations people here. And so that's quite interesting. Or I've had other students who, I remember an Italian student saying to me too, hey, like a lot of Italians have worked and built this country, like how come our symbols aren't in here as well? And so again, what it's doing is it's creating more questions that create more questions that create more questions. This is a beautiful Canadian coat of arms. This is what's on our passports. It's beautiful. Whoever designed it is very artistic. There's a lot of interesting elements to this, and there's a lot of thought being put into this. But again, when you're thinking about a text similar to this, it's interesting when you bring in that concept of a missing voice or a missing opinion, and this is one of those examples of where little people are big thinkers, and when those little people, big thinkers, get into being bigger people with who are big thinkers, these types of things start to really resonate with people, and again, creates that whole idea of higher order thinking, but also that concept of this is critical literacy, critical thinking. And again, what an interesting text to analyze. Okay, so from here right now, David and I can address, if there's any questions that have been asked online, we can kind of move from there.
Thank you, guys. So the first question I wanted to raise deals with kids and apps. So we had one comment that my children are using Prodigy for math, and they're wondering if there's any apps that are relevant to the grade 4 to 8 age group that they can be pointing their kids towards.
One of the better websites to actually check out is Common Sense Media. There are so many apps that come up week by week. There's numerous apps that actually come about. But what's interesting about apps is that the longest amount of time on average on an app that's actually downloaded is 90 seconds. And we're getting better, but it's interesting how culturally when tablets came out, 4 or 5 years ago, we would just kind of download anything that we saw, and we're getting better with that. But a website that you could visit is Common Sense Media, which actually assesses and evaluates, and it gives you ratings on different types of apps. Right now, Prodigy is a popular one, but there's other ones out there that in a few weeks there'll probably be ones that'll be even better than that. So, or maybe not, but we'll see.
Oh, that's great. You talked about the 21st century learning. I'm wondering, how is that being applied to our school libraries and our school learning commons?
Okay, so Yeah, we're doing a lot of interesting and doing a lot of learning around that whole idea of the learning commons. But again, what we're really looking at is, traditionally when we looked at a learning environment, we looked at it as the four walls of a classroom. We're now looking outside of that, and looking at a library as just something that's just not a place where you go and exchange books, but it's also a place where you go and do a lot of learning, and it's an environment that's set up for that. But again, the other piece I want to plug in there too is also the outdoor education piece. There's a lot of outdoor learning. If you've noticed in a lot of our schools around our board, we're trying to design outdoor learning environments. And so we're looking at learning environments just not in the classroom, but also in other areas. There's also the gymnasium too. There's other areas within a school that we see as a learning environment. So it's not just situated within the four walls of a classroom.
Excellent.
However, I think that a school that does have print resources as well is ahead of the game. Because so far all testing is done on print resource, not on screen. Although New Zealand has screen resource for testing. So that's going to change. But I think print resource for kids is a part of the deal. Not all of it. So library, I like the way you said libraries are full of all kinds of things. And libraries may not have walls. There are classroom libraries, there are district libraries. People are now realizing we may have to share our products. So there are books you can get sets of from the board or from another school, or you'll have a book room with really new contemporary things put in by parents who are maybe looking after that book room. So I'm really pleased that we're seeing library as bigger, as you've described, and it's comprehensive. So it's got this, this, and this.
And the biggest shift with that, sorry, too, is we used to call it a library, we're now calling it a learning commons. So just even shifting that name, it's like, it really makes us think differently about what that space actually looks like, right?
Absolutely, for sure. I know as a parent, it sort of made me think differently about libraries as well.
Yeah.
Learning commons.
Yeah, no, it's
We
a,
started talking about it in our school.
yeah, and so it's not something that'll happen overnight. We're thinking of this over the next several years as a phase in, but step one, like, would be, let's try and call it a learning commons. But if everyone starts calling it that, then the tweaking will start to shift, right?
Here's a bit of a tough question. Sometimes our children come home with these books and they don't love them. They find them, I hate to say it, but boring at times. What tools can parents do to maybe work with their teachers, if there's any resources there, any ways to approach that? And secondly, maybe for David afterwards, if you could answer, what kinds of reading habits or outlets should parents be looking at if they find their kids not excited or really enjoying the books they're bringing home, but still have an appetite to read? What can they be looking for?
Well, I think you just said the library, we have to enrich it, but you have to look and see which books. Are they textbooks? Are they books that they're going to be instructed in? Are they free choice books? Are they books assigned? Could they agree with the teacher that I choose one, you choose one? And that's a really nice way of doing it. Some schools have a quarter of it chosen by the teacher and 3/4 by the kids. There are small reading groups where you now can choose the book for your group. There are all the books that are in sets of 5. Which one will you choose for your group? But the big secret I have in my life is what you do with the book that he doesn't want to read. What you're going to do with it, get online. I got my website going and ask you 4 hard questions. Let's go. I was in a grade 9 class where I gave a sheet out a story to be read and they all put their heads on the desk. I said, "You're not going to read it?" "No. We don't like doing that." "Oh, well, I'm going to do some work in a minute where you have to know what's in it because I'm going to have you come up here and talk to me and roll about it." Everybody read it. So what you do with it is really significant. If it's just grunge work, nobody wants to do that. But if you're going to have something to do, you're going to make a PowerPoint about these 2 books with your buddy because you both read 2 books by one author. Well, I want to see that PowerPoint. What's the Venn diagram going to look like with those 2 books crisscrossing because he's the author? There's so much to do. That's what's exciting about those older kids. They can really get into things like that.
And thank you. That's an excellent point. And Dave, and Michael, how would you approach it in terms of just our school boards? Like, if you want to.
So a huge skill that we need to teach our children and our students is actually how to select books, and that whole idea of book selection. You don't just kind of walk up and grab something and then zap it out, and then walk out. It's the idea of being intrigued. Like, what is intriguing you to that? Like, why are you moving towards something like that? And it's also reflecting of what David said earlier, that it's not that these students are getting bored with it or don't like it. It's that they don't know what they're choosing really at times. And so it's the whole idea is that they don't like to read. They just don't like what they're reading at that particular time. But also that cue matrix, that question matrix, also allows to enrich in what they're reading as well. So when you can create some nice, rich questions that you can prompt your child with, it then starts to spark that book as well. So trying to add some sparks to particular texts allow for that engagement.
For example, if they're reading a novel set in World War II, with my group here, I would say, Bill, tomorrow, bring me some photographs from the web about World War II. I want to know what the battles looked like. It's going to enrich our reading today. That's your job for tomorrow. He didn't want to read that, but he's going to dig like crazy to get those pictures of World War II up there. Then I want some letters written by soldiers home. Diane, find me 4 of those letters online, would you? Because for the next day, they're in the book. There's something in the book. I want to see a few more. So I think it's what you do with what you've got, and you got to make that engaging.
Absolutely. And my last question for you guys, similar to the grade K-3 group, if parents can walk away with just one thing today, what would you encourage them in this grade 4 to 8 level to be looking for?
Well, for me, quantity. More is better. If you're on a hockey team, I want you playing every day. I want more. I want more reading, more writing. I want kids doing, if it's karate, if it's dance, whatever it is, I want more of it. Kids at those ages, they need to fill their lives up. They don't need to spend a lot of time reflecting in their diaries. That's a little later on. I want these guys involved and doing and physical and get participating so that all their energies, their senses are fully involved in their lives.
And Michael?
And just with tonight as well, talking about that accountable talk, I just think it's important for parents and for their children to consistently engage in grand conversations all the time, like having those conversations with one another, looking at different texts and looking at things like this or things around your community, to engage in those conversations. We want to create a culture of critical thinkers, and so it's important at a home level that we're engaging them in those types of conversations, right? And so, again, it can be a challenge as a parent where you think that, I'm tired tonight and I can't do this, but just, 1 or 2 of those little plugged-in conversations can really make a difference for your child.
And you know what? I had a last-minute question come in here, and I forgot to open up to the floor. So before I go to this question, were there any questions from our audience here in the room today? No, we're good. Okay, so I'm going to ask this question from online. If we have children who are reluctant readers, not necessarily they don't like the books, but just reluctant to read, can you recommend any series or any types of activities that they could take on?
Go online, because there are such wonderful websites now saying books kids will love to read who hate to read. And get online and do them some research. All the adventure series, 4 to 8, they're into the fantasy adventure series. Now Harry Potter began it all. And I think they need to read, as I love series books because it gets them quantity and faster and more fluent. So I also think reluctant readers are involved in what they're using, what they're choosing, and what they're going to do with it. That we're reading this because we're going to do something very powerful with it. We're going to go online with the author. We're only going to ask 5 questions. We have to have 25 questions to choose our 5 from. You, young man, are in charge of picking the 5 questions. I'm adamant that we involve them, engage them. So that reluctant reader doesn't have a choice in my classroom. There's so much happening.
Is it fair to say that there isn't a bad book to read?
Yeah, it's fair to say that. It's fair to say that there are books that don't fit my schema, my life frame, my world. Not many grade 5 boys want to read about romance. You might find a few grade 5 girls who do. So you look and make choices. That in those choice of books, there's a few of those and a few of those.
I think, it's getting to know your child as well,
Yeah,
right?
that's
and understanding what they want. And I always like to plug this in for grade 4 to 8 as well, is that picture books don't stop in grade 3. Some of my favorite books are picture books, and my favorite author is Anthony Brown. And if you read a story like Voices in the Park, and I did it with the last classroom I was in was in grade 6, and I did that read aloud with that group. And I don't know how many of them, there was about 4 or 5 boys, they went to their own public library and pulled out his other picture books and brought those in. So again, that was a book that I really enjoyed. I shared it with those students. It's because it created more thinking. There was amazing conversation, and he's an author that's amazing with doing that. And again, like don't pigeonhole yourself with chapter books. There's so many variety of different texts that you can move to, but sometimes there's a stigma when you hit grade 4. It's time to move on to a chapter book, and that's not the case. There's so many different types of texts that are out there, and so sometimes people who don't like chapter books are considered reluctant readers, and we don't want to necessarily pigeonhole them.
Guinness Book of Records, most popular book read. It's
Yeah.
hard words in there.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thank you very much. On that note, I'm going to pass it over to Linda to close things out.
I wanted to thank everyone tonight for coming out. I know it's a very lovely evening, so it's very much appreciated. And I wanted to especially thank Professor David Booth for coming out and giving us such great advice and strategies, and also our in-house, Michael Hamill. So thank you very much. And I hope you all have a lovely evening. And if you have any questions or anything else, you can always visit our website at dcpic.ca. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.